I'm Clara Jenkins, 29 years old, and last month my grandfather, Arthur Jenkins, left me $30 million in his will, bypassing my parents completely. At his funeral, while I was still mourning, my father exploded when the attorney announced the inheritance. A week later, I got a message. Come to the penthouse. We need to talk. When I walked into my grandfather's study, my parents were waiting. My mother held a lighter. My father held the check. You have two options, he said. Give us $15 million or watch this burn. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't about money, it was about control, and they had just lost it. Before I share how that fire turned into freedom, let me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family who couldn't stand to see you grow beyond them. This is the story of how I broke the cycle and built something better. Growing up in New York, I never had the kind of storybook family most children dream about. My parents, Robert and Eleanor Jenkins, were more invested in appearances and social standing than in the quiet, essential work of actually being parents. Sure, our massive penthouse on the Upper East Side dazzled our guests, but inside those pristine walls, warmth was a rare commodity. The one person who brought light into that cold world was my grandfather, Arthur Jenkins. Grandpa Arthur built his empire from the ground up, starting with a modest tailoring shop back in the 1950s. That tiny space eventually blossomed into the Jenkins Group, a fashion and retail powerhouse worth hundreds of millions. But unlike my parents, he never flaunted his wealth. He wore the same Timex watch for 50 years and drove old trucks until they coughed their last breath. Money's just a tool, Clara, he used to tell me during our cherished Sunday afternoons at the New York Aquarium. What matters is what you build with it. While my parents jetted off to Paris, Milan, or wherever the social elite gathered that season, Grandpa taught me how to identify fish species, fix old film cameras, and most importantly, how to value people for their character, not their bank accounts. He showed up for every school play, every science fair, and every graduation. Meanwhile, my parents were always tied up with some unmissable social obligation. I inherited his practicality like a sacred gift. So after graduating from Columbia with a degree in marine biology and documentary filmmaking, I stunned my family by turning down a cushy executive role at Jenkins Group. Instead, I chose to dive, literally, into the world's oceans, documenting endangered marine life for conservation organizations. You're throwing your potential away, my father roared, during what became one of our final confrontations 3 years ago. Do you even realize what people would give for the opportunities you're squandering? I responded calmly. I'm creating my own opportunities. That only made him angrier. My mother, ever the tactful one, wasn't much more supportive. Sweetheart, it's lovely that you have these passions, but surely you can pursue them while holding a respectable position in society. I moved out the very next day. I found myself in a humble 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, which I shared with my best friend, Maya Lopez. We met during freshman orientation and bonded instantly over a shared love of photography and the natural world. Unlike others in my old social circle, Maya never cared about my last name or who I was related to. She saw me, just me. My lifestyle confused relatives obsessed with status. I drove a reliable but forgettable Honda Civic, dressed for comfort instead of designer labels, and poured my savings into camera gear and conservation projects. Not jewelry or lavish vacations. The only luxury I've ever indulged in is a yearly donation to the International Ocean Conservation Alliance, a tradition Grandpa and I started when I was 16. It's not glamorous, but it's meaningful. And for me, that has always mattered more than anything you could hang around your neck or park in your driveway. My parents think money is meant to be shown off, Grandpa once said to me, his voice calm but weary. They've never understood that real wealth means having enough to help others without worrying if you'll have anything left for yourself. That was just one of the many lessons he passed down to me, not through lectures, but through quiet truths spoken over evening tea or long walks along the East River. His health began to decline last year, cancer. The kind that spreads and doesn't respond well to treatment. I dropped every international project I was working on and moved into his living room to care for him during what we both knew would be his final months. My parents came by occasionally, always with their lawyer in tow, trying to press him about inheritance matters while he was still lucid. He would send them away, waving them off with that same sharpness he once reserved for arrogant business partners. "There's time for that later," he insisted. "They've been circling like vultures for years," he confided one evening as we watched the sunset from his favorite recliner. "Your father's been borrowing against his inheritance for decades. Did you know that?" I didn't. But it certainly explained their increasingly extravagant lifestyle, despite my father's less than stellar investment career. In those final months, Grandpa and I talked more openly than we ever had before. He shared stories of his youth, the struggles of building a company from nothing, and the deep, abiding love he had for my grandmother, gone now for over 10 years. Sometimes, in softer moments, he spoke of regrets. "I gave him too much, made it too easy," he said of my father. "I thought I was showing love, but really I was feeding his worst instincts. I won't make that mistake with you, Clara." At the time, I thought he was just reflecting on parenting choices. I didn't realize he was leaving breadcrumbs, little clues about the legacy he was quietly building for me. When Grandpa passed peacefully in his sleep, I was holding his hand. My parents arrived 2 hours later, already demanding the keys to his private office. The funeral the following week was a spectacle that would have made Grandpa cringe. My parents insisted on the most expensive casket, the most elaborate flower arrangements, and a reception at the plaza that felt more like a networking gala than a farewell. I stood in the corner with Maya, watching relatives who had barely acknowledged Grandpa in life, now drowning in grief, or maybe just expectation. "You holding up okay?" Maya asked, handing me a glass of water. She knew I didn't drink at family gatherings. Staying sharp was a necessity, not a preference. "Just trying to get through this with some dignity," I replied, watching my cousin Daniel corner the family attorney. Daniel had always been my rival for Grandpa's attention, though his strategy leaned more toward flashy success than genuine connection. "Your grandpa would have hated this circus," Maya muttered. I gave a faint, sad smile. "Actually, he would have found it darkly funny," I said. "He always told me, 'You'll see who people really are once money enters the room.'" I had no idea how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The reading of the will was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the downtown office of Chen & Associates. Maya came with me for moral support. We arrived 15 minutes early to find the elegant reception area already half full, with relatives I usually only saw at Christmas dinners or the occasional wedding. "Darling Clara," my mother all but air-kissed both my cheeks, the heavy cloud of her Chanel perfume arriving before she did. As always, she looked immaculate, every platinum strand perfectly in place, even in the midst of supposed mourning. "We saved you a seat between us," she chimed, gesturing toward the front. "Thanks, but I'm fine back here with Maya," I replied, choosing a pair of chairs near the back of the room. My father didn't bother with pleasantries. He merely nodded at me before turning back to whisper something to Uncle Charles, his older brother, who had never quite forgiven Grandpa for giving my father the bigger role in the family business, despite being the younger son. The conference room we were ushered into had the kind of quiet grandeur that whispered old money. A massive mahogany table stretched the length of the room, surrounded by leather chairs and somber oil portraits of stern-faced men in suits, presumably the firm's founding partners. Most of the family was already there. Aunt Brenda, Charles's wife, fiddled with her pearl necklace. My cousins Daniel and Sophia chatted quietly. Great Aunt Betty, Grandpa's only surviving sister, looked genuinely heartbroken. Others, more distant relatives I barely recognized, looked more curious than grief-stricken, as if waiting for a show to begin. Finally, Sarah Chen walked in, carrying a worn leather briefcase. At 70, she was Grandpa's peer, his friend and legal counsel for decades, through mergers, acquisitions, and family storms alike. With her silver hair and signature neck bow, she looked more like a beloved professor than a high-powered corporate attorney. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her tone solemn but warm. "Before we begin the formal proceedings, I'd like to offer my heartfelt condolences. Arthur was more than a client. He was a dear friend for over 40 years. My father cleared his throat impatiently. "We appreciate your words, Sarah, but perhaps we can move forward?" Her expression didn't change, but I noticed the faintest tightening around her eyes. "Of course, Robert. I understand emotions are high today." As she launched into the formal preamble, my mind drifted back to the last real conversation I had with Grandpa. Just 3 days before he passed, It had been a good day. He was sharp, unusually energetic. With the nurse's help, he sat upright in his recliner and asked me to bring him his old leather journal. "Clara," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "I want you to know, I've made arrangements. You don't have to worry." "Grandpa, I don't want to talk about the will," I protested gently. He smiled, his eyes twinkling with the mischief I remembered from childhood. "It's not just about money, it's about justice and consequences. Some folks have been waiting a long time for a payout they never earned." "What do you mean?" I asked. He just patted my hand. "You'll understand soon enough. Just remember, I thought this through. Trust Sarah. She knows what to do." The memory faded as Sarah Chen began reading the actual bequests. As expected, there were many small, thoughtful gifts. $10,000 to his longtime housekeeper. $20,000 to the gardener who had tended his roses for 30 years. Donations to his favorite charities. Keepsakes for old friends. Great Aunt Betty received a modest but comfortable annuity to ensure her remaining years would be free from financial worry. But the air in the room grew heavier as the larger assets remained untouched. I saw Cousin Daniel glance at his watch repeatedly, while my father bounced his leg under the table with growing agitation. My mother kept sneaking sharp glances in my direction, her stare prickling at the back of my neck, though I couldn't imagine what she expected from me. "And now," Sarah said, prompting a collective lean forward from the room, "regarding the Jenkins Group." She paused just long enough to make the air feel electric. "As you all know, Mr. Arthur Jenkins retained full control of the company until his death. His shares will now be placed in a trust overseen by the board of directors, with profits distributed as follows." The next several minutes outlined a complex arrangement that essentially preserved the company's integrity, while doling out modest dividends to various family members. My father received a seat on the board, but not the control he had clearly expected. I could see his knuckles whitening as he gripped the arms of his chair, his composure thinning with every word Sarah read. "This is outrageous," Uncle Charles suddenly barked, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "The company should be passed directly to the family, not handed over to be controlled by the board." "These were Mr. Arthur's explicit wishes," Miss Chen replied, her tone calm but firm as steel. "Should anyone challenge them, there are contingency clauses that will trigger the immediate sale of the company to its employees via an ESOP." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. "I would strongly advise against testing those clauses." The room fell utterly still. Grandfather had outmaneuvered them. I watched Daniel lean over and whisper something sharply to my father, who responded with a firm shake of his head. The pressure in the air felt like a storm about to break, and I had the creeping sense that the worst was still to come. Miss Chen continued reading, now moving through a list of smaller bequests. Grandpa's beloved collection of vintage cars would be donated to a transportation museum. His carefully curated art collection would be distributed among cultural institutions. With each item named, I saw my father's expression darken further. The family's summer home in the Hamptons was left to Great Aunt Betty. The Vermont ski lodge had already been sold, the proceeds earmarked for conservation efforts. "And the main residence," my mother blurted out, her composure finally slipping. "The Upper East Side penthouse?" "I'm getting to that, Eleanor," Ms. Chen said, with the patient precision of someone long accustomed to managing difficult clients. "But first, there's a matter Mr. Arthur considered of the utmost importance." For the first time that morning, her gaze landed directly on me. A chill ran down my spine. Something was about to shift, and somehow I was at the center of it. "To my beloved granddaughter, Clara Elizabeth Jenkins," Ms. Chen read, her voice softening. "I leave the sum of $30 million to be transferred immediately upon the reading of this will into trusts established in your name." The silence that followed was total. It was as if the room had been vacuum sealed, every breath stolen by disbelief. $30 million. My mind could barely process the number. I made a modest living documenting marine life. This was more than I could ever spend in several lifetimes. The silence shattered like glass. "This is absurd," my father shouted, leaping to his feet so suddenly his chair crashed against the wall. "There must be some mistake." "This is outrageous," my mother added, her perfectly rehearsed calm finally cracking. Daniel spat out a string of profanity that made Aunt Betty gasp and clutch her pearls. In the middle of the chaos, I remained frozen, my thoughts jammed by what I'd just heard. Maya gently squeezed my hand beneath the table, anchoring me. Ms. Chen raised a hand, calling the room to order. "There's more," she said simply. Once the noise settled, she added, "This inheritance comes with a personal message from Mr. Arthur." She opened a folder and pulled out a sealed envelope, handing it to me. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the letter and instantly recognized my grandfather's steady, slanted handwriting. "My dearest Clara," I read silently as the room held its breath. "If you're reading this, I've moved on to my next great adventure. Don't be too sad. I've lived a full life. The money I've left you is not just a gesture of love, but of absolute trust in your character and judgment. Unlike others who saw my estate as something owed, you've always earned your way, valuing people over possessions. You may wonder why such a large sum. The answer is simple. You're the only one I trust to use it wisely. I've watched you grow into a woman of principle and compassion. Your work documenting endangered species has made me prouder than any business deal I ever closed. Some in the family will be angry. Let them be. Their reactions will only confirm what I already knew of their character. Sarah will explain further, but let's just say, some individuals have already taken more than their fair share from me during my life. Use this money to pursue your dreams, Clara. Start that ocean conservation fund you always spoke of. Travel, learn, grow. Just promise me one thing. Never let wealth change who you are. With love and unwavering faith, Grandpa." When I lifted my eyes from the letter, they were blurred with tears and staring straight into the faces of my parents, who had now moved directly in front of me. Their expressions had shifted completely. Gone was the fury, replaced by bright, strained smiles that fooled no one. "Darling Clara," my mother began in her most syrupy tone, "what a wonderful surprise. Your grandfather always had such a soft spot for you." My father nodded enthusiastically. "We should sit down and talk strategy. I know some opportunities that—" "Kenneth, Diana," Miss Chen cut in, crisp and clear. "There is more in the will directly pertaining to you both." Reluctantly, they returned to their seats. My mother, however, took the chair beside mine, resting a faux affectionate hand on my arm that made my skin crawl. "To my son Kenneth and his wife Diana," Miss Chen resumed, "I leave the sum of $150,000, with a strong suggestion that it be used to address your considerable outstanding debts." My father's face flushed deep red. "This is outrageous. After everything I've done for this company." Miss Chen didn't blink. "Furthermore, Kenneth and Diana are required to vacate the Upper East Side penthouse, currently occupied without rent, within 30 days. The property itself will be placed in trust under terms to be disclosed separately." My mother's hand stiffened on my arm. "But where are we supposed to go? That's our home." "That was never your home, Diana," Miss Chen said, not unkindly. "It always belonged to Mr. Arthur. He allowed you to live there as a courtesy." The reading went on, more bequests announced, more names called, but I barely heard any of it. My mind was still spinning from everything that had just unfolded. Not only had Grandpa left me a fortune, he had also, with quiet deliberation, cut off my parents from their financial lifeline. That modest $150,000 wouldn't begin to cover their debts, not if Grandpa's words about their finances were even half true. As the official reading of the will came to an end, family members began drifting out, some pausing to offer forced congratulations, their words hollow and eyes tight with resentment. Others didn't bother pretending, too incensed to even look my way. Just as I was about to leave, Ms. Chen raised her hand. "I'd like Clara to stay for a private conversation," she said firmly. "And her parents as well," she added, when they tried to usher me out with them. Once the room had cleared, leaving just the four of us and Maya, who I insisted stay by my side, Ms. Chen opened a new folder. "Mr. Arthur requested I share this information privately," she explained, sliding a set of documents across the table. "These are records of loans extended to Kenneth and Diana over the past 15 years, totaling nearly $12 million. Not a single repayment was made. My father didn't even try to deny it. Those were advances on my inheritance, not loans." "They were legally documented as loans," Ms. Chen corrected, "with interest, none of which has been paid." "We're family," my mother protested. "Arthur understood our position. We had a certain standard to uphold." Ms. Chen continued as if she hadn't heard. In addition, there are issues regarding unauthorized withdrawals from several Jenkins Group accounts under Kenneth's management. The forensic audit is extensive. My father paled. Those were legitimate business expenses: the Maldives property, the yacht, the gambling debts in Monaco. Ms. Chen raised an eyebrow. Mr. Arthur chose not to pursue criminal charges during his lifetime for the sake of the family's reputation, but he was fully aware of those activities. I felt a wave of nausea. The man who once lectured me about responsibility and preserving family legacy had been quietly stealing from his own father for years. This, Ms. Chen said, her voice firm, is why Clara has received the majority of the liquid assets. Mr. Arthur no longer trusted you with large sums of money, Kenneth. This is absurd, my father snapped, turning to me now. Clara, you can't possibly need $30 million. As your parents, we expect you to do the right thing. The right thing, I repeated, my voice finally finding its footing. Family supports family, my mother chimed in smoothly. Your grandfather clearly wasn't thinking straight in the end. We could contest the will, create a public scandal, or we can settle this quietly as a family. And what exactly is it that you want? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We'll need at least $15 million, my father said, as casually as if he were ordering dinner, just to meet our obligations and maintain our lifestyle. That would be fair. I looked at them, really looked, perhaps for the first time in my life. These were the people who had prioritized social status over parenting, the ones who missed my college graduation for a yacht party, the ones who criticized every choice I ever made that didn't align with their materialistic values. And now, they were asking me to bail them out of a disaster entirely of their own making. No, I said simply. What did you say? My father's voice dropped dangerously low. I said no, I'm not giving you the money. Ms. Chen cleared her throat delicately. Before this discussion goes any further, Mr. Arthur asked me to give this to Clara. She handed me an envelope containing an actual check, yes, a physical check, for $30 million. He thought you might like something tangible to mark the occasion, although the funds have already been wired. I held the check, staring at the surreal string of zeros. This conversation isn't over, my father warned as Ms. Chen ushered us toward the door. We'll continue this at home. That's no longer your home, I reminded him softly, the check still in my hand. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them later that afternoon at my grandfather's penthouse. Maya offered to come along, but I knew this was something I needed to face on my own. Keep your phone on, she said, and call me if anything gets weird. When it comes to my family, I said with a faint smile, define weird. The home where I'd shared some of the happiest hours of my childhood with Grandpa now felt tainted by the presence of my parents. They were waiting for me in his study. My father paced near the window, glancing out at the garden like he could escape through it. My mother sat on the leather couch, posture stiff, her body radiating tension like it was armor. Clara, my father began bluntly, no preamble, no warmth. You need to understand our position. Everything we've ever done was for the legacy of this family. I stayed near the door, arms folded. What legacy? The legacy of living beyond your means? Of bleeding Grandpa dry under the guise of his generosity? Of embezzlement dressed up as entitlement? Don't be dramatic, my mother interjected, her tone smooth like glass, hiding cracks beneath. Your grandfather spoiled you because you were his little pet project. His artist granddaughter with her camera and her causes. That was charming to him. But running a family like ours takes more than marine life photos and charitable hobbies. And what exactly have you contributed to this family, aside from spending its money? My father slammed his hand down on Grandpa's desk. That's enough. We're your parents. We gave you everything, the best schools, the right connections, the opportunities. Grandpa gave me those, I corrected softly, when he wasn't busy covering for your mistakes. You ungrateful little... He stopped himself, trying visibly to regain control. Listen to me. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly at the end. The cancer drugs, they clouded his judgment. Funny how neither of you ever questioned his judgment when he was bailing you out of your latest financial disaster. My mother shifted tactics. Her voice softened, like velvet concealing a dagger. Sweetheart, we know you're grieving. We all are. But think about what this money could mean, for all of us. We could resolve temporary financial setbacks, restore the vacation properties, Ensure the family name still commands respect in the right circles. You mean continue pretending to be wealthier than you are, while contributing absolutely nothing of value to anyone? You ungrateful brat! My father shouted now, the mask completely off. After all we've sacrificed for you. What exactly did you sacrifice? I asked, the words calm but laced with steel. From where I stand, it was Grandpa who sacrificed everything, while you took advantage of him. He was my father. That money should have come directly to me, he bellowed, his face twisted with fury, not funneled through my daughter in some posthumous power play. Maybe he knew he couldn't trust either of you with it, I said quietly. My mother stood, stepping toward me with those calculating eyes I knew all too well. Clara, be reasonable. We're talking about your future too. Without our guidance, you're bound to make mistakes. You don't understand how the world of real wealth operates. I understand enough to know that $30 million doesn't vanish unless someone is catastrophically irresponsible with it. Like the two of you have been with everything Grandpa ever gave you. My father, suddenly composed again, adjusted his tie. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer $15 million into our account. We'll settle family obligations, clear the debts, and we all move forward. No scandals, no lawsuits. And if I say no, then we contest the will, my mother said, her voice cutting clean. We'll claim undue influence, diminished capacity. It'll get ugly, public. Grandpa's finances dragged through probate, his mental state dissected. Is that really what you want for his legacy? A chill crept up my spine. They were willing to tarnish his memory just to get their hands on his money. Ms. Chen seems pretty confident the will is airtight. Sarah Chen isn't infallible, my father snapped. Neither was my father. We'll tie up the money in litigation for years. You won't see a dime while attorneys bleed the estate dry. The threat hung heavy in the air, and I realized they absolutely would do it, not because they believed they'd win, but out of spite. Pure, relentless spite. Fine, I said at last. Let me think about it. Relief flooded their faces like a storm finally breaking. They thought they'd won. There's our good girl, my mother smiled. Reaching out to stroke my cheek, I flinched. I said I'll think. I'm not agreeing to anything. The check? My father asked suddenly, his voice clipped. Where is it? In my bag, I said, nodding toward the purse I'd set on a side table. Before I could move, he lunged for it, shockingly fast for a man in his 60s, snatching it up and rifling through it. What are you doing? I demanded, reaching for my bag. Ensuring you make the right decision, he growled, dumping the contents onto Grandpa's desk and rummaging until he found the check. Give that back. I lunged for it, but my mother stepped between us. This is for your own good, Clara, she said firmly. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have, I shouted, trying to push past her. But what happened next unfolded too quickly to stop. My father raised the check high, triumphant, while my mother reached into her purse and pulled out a silver lighter, the antique one she always carried, a gift from some obscure European noble she once used to boost her social clout. One last chance, my father warned, holding the check just out of my reach. Agree to our terms, or Grandpa's symbol of trust becomes just that, a symbol. You can't be serious, I gasped, but the truth was they were. That check was written to me. It's my property. Not anymore, my mother said coolly, flicking the lighter. My father lowered the check into the flame. 15 million, that's our offer. I told you already, the funds were wired electronically, I pleaded. Burning that check won't change a thing. Then why are you so worried? His eyes narrowed. No, I think it means more to you than you're letting on. Maybe Sarah lied. Maybe this check is the only way you really get the money. You're being insane, I started, but he wasn't listening. With a nod to my mother, he dipped the corner of the check into the flame. No, I screamed, reaching for it, but they blocked me. The fire took quickly, curling the paper into a dark husk, the edges blackening and falling apart. Within seconds, it was gone. You'll never see a penny now, he said coldly, brushing the ashes off Grandpa's desk like trash. It's ours now. Tomorrow we meet with Sarah Chen and explain you consented to an alternate division. With the check destroyed, she'll have to release the funds the right way. It hit me then, the full, absurd horror of what just happened. And before I could stop myself, I started to laugh. It began as a quiet chuckle, then grew uncontrollable, until I was bent over in hysterics. My parents exchanged alarmed glances. "She's hysterical," my mother muttered, reaching for her phone. "I'll call Dr. Winters." "No," I gasped between laughter. "I'm not hysterical. I'm just shocked at how badly you've misunderstood everything." "What's so funny?" my father snapped, his smugness suddenly cracking. I managed to steady my laughter just enough to speak. "The check you just burned, it was symbolic. The money's already in trusts under my name. Miss Chen arranged everything weeks ago." Their expressions shifted, from confusion to disbelief to the unmistakable horror of realization. "You're lying," my mother accused, but even she didn't sound convinced. "Call Sarah Chen if you don't believe me," I offered, pulling out my phone. "She's on my speed dial." Or better yet, I tapped the screen a few times and held it up. "Here, I just logged into one of the trust accounts. Take a look for yourselves." They both leaned in, eyes locking on the screen. $15 million, just in this one account. "That can't be possible," my father stammered. "Grandpa knew you better than you thought," I said quietly. "He anticipated exactly what you might try. That's why the check was ceremonial, a test, maybe. A way to see what you'd do when faced with temptation." "A test we failed," my mother whispered, sinking onto the couch. "Spectacularly," I added. My father's face contorted with fury. "This isn't over. We can still contest the will, claim fraud, manipulation." The study door opened, and Sarah Chen stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed security officers. "Actually, Kenneth," she said, her voice as calm as ever, "it is over. I received an alert the moment Clara's check was destroyed. It was embedded with an RFID chip for precisely this scenario." "You were tracking us," my mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "I was protecting my client's interests," Miss Chen replied smoothly. "Mr. Arthur predicted you might resort to desperate measures. Officers, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins from the premises. They are no longer welcome here." "This is outrageous," my father exploded. "I'll sue you into oblivion. I'll have your license revoked." Ms. Chen remained composed. "You're welcome to try, Kenneth, but before you do, you might want to consider the forensic evidence I've collected. Evidence of embezzlement from Jenkins Group. Evidence that, until now, hasn't been shared with the board or the authorities." My father turned pale. "You wouldn't." "I absolutely would," she said firmly. "Mr. Arthur chose not to press charges in his lifetime, for Clara's sake. I do not share his restraint." My mother stood shakily. "This house is still ours. You can't throw us out." "Actually, I can," I said, discovering a new steadiness in my voice. "As of this morning, I'm the legal owner of this property." "What?" They both turned toward me in stunned disbelief. "Another clause in the will," Ms. Chen explained. "The Upper East Side property was placed in a trust with Clara as the sole beneficiary. The trust was activated the moment Mr. Arthur passed, though you were granted a 30-day grace period to vacate. Based on your actions today, that grace period is now officially revoked." "You can't do this to us," my mother pleaded, her carefully composed facade finally cracking. "Where are we supposed to go?" For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity, just enough to soften my tone, not my resolve. "You have the $150,000 Grandpa left you. That's enough to rent a decent apartment while you figure things out." $150,000. My father looked as though he'd been punched in the gut. "That won't even cover the interest on our debts." "Then maybe it's time to start living within your means," I said gently. The security officer stepped forward, signaling the end of the discussion. My parents had no choice but to leave, though my father couldn't resist one last parting shot. "This isn't over, Clara. Family doesn't treat family like this." "No," I agreed. "Family doesn't burn checks, threaten lawsuits, or steal from each other. You taught me exactly what family shouldn't be." Once they were escorted out, Ms. Chen lingered behind. "Your grandfather would be proud of how you handled that," she said. "He knew it wouldn't be easy." "Did he really think they'd try to destroy the check?" She gave me a small, bittersweet smile. Arthur understood his son better than Kenneth ever realized. The RFID chip was his idea. He told me, "People reveal who they truly are when they think they have nothing left to lose." I looked around the study, surrounded by memories of Grandpa, his books, his chessboard, the quiet wisdom he left behind. What do I even do now, Sarah? $30 million. It's overwhelming. Take your time, she advised. There's no rush. The trusts are structured to preserve the principal while providing you with a generous income. You can focus on your films, travel, or whatever brings you joy. An idea was already forming in my mind. The first thing I want to do is buy this house. Officially, no trusts, no legal arrangements. I want it in my name. That can be arranged easily, she nodded. May I ask why? I ran my hand across Grandpa's old desk, remembering the afternoons we spent playing chess when I was 8. Because it belongs in the family, the real family, with the people who loved him for who he was, not for what he could give them. Miss Chen nodded with approval. I'll begin the paperwork tomorrow. As she prepared to leave, she handed me a small key. One more thing. Arthur wanted you to have this. It unlocks his private safe in the library. Inside, you'll find personal journals, family history, and things he believed would help you understand why he made the choices he did. When she left, I stood alone in the study, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of freedom. For the first time in my life, I was truly independent, financially and emotionally. No more guilt-driven obligations, no more manipulations masked as tradition, no more defending my choices or lifestyle. For the first time, I was free. I called Maya the moment the house finally felt quiet again, eager to tell her everything. Oh my God, she exhaled after I finished the story. They actually burned the check? That sounds like something straight out of a movie. Sometimes real life is stranger than fiction, I said, with a dry laugh, finally able to find some humor in the chaos. You should have seen their faces when Sarah Chen walked in with security. Priceless. So what now? Private jets to Paris? Malibu beach house? Millionaire status unlocked. Actually, I said, glancing around the study, I'm thinking of staying right here. This house, it's not just a valuable property. It's where Grandpa and I bonded. It's where he taught me what truly matters. That's my Clara, Maya said warmly. Given a life-changing amount of money and your first thought is emotional value. Well, that and the Marine Conservation Fund Grandpa and I used to talk about. I think it's finally time to bring that dream to life. He'd love that, Maya said, her voice soft with certainty. Want me to swing by with some food and celebrate your first night as Queen of the Manor? Absolutely, I smiled. And Maya, thank you for being there today, for being the family I got to choose. After we hung up, I wandered through the home that was now mine, not as a symbol of wealth or prestige, but as a place filled with meaning and memory. Every hallway echoed with pieces of Grandpa's wisdom. Every room felt like a chapter in a book we had once written together. For the first time, I saw it not as an inheritance, but as a foundation, one I could build my own legacy upon. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about using resources wisely, just as Grandpa taught me. About creating something meaningful, something that would outlast me the way his work had outlasted him. And maybe, more than anything, it was about breaking the cycle, ending the generational grip of entitlement and materialism that had poisoned my parents. It was about proving that the Jenkins name could mean something better than what they turned it into. With that resolve anchoring me, I made my way to the library, where Grandpa's private safe waited with the last lessons he had prepared for me. The next month passed in a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and adjusting to my new reality. That first week alone was packed with consultations. Financial advisors, legal experts, and tax professionals, all arranged by Ms. Chen to ensure I had every tool to make informed decisions. The goal, explained Marion Foster, the financial advisor, Ms. Chen had personally recommended, is not just to preserve the wealth, but to grow it responsibly, while supporting the priorities that matter to you. I learned more about investment strategy, charitable foundations, and estate taxes in those first few weeks than I had in my entire life. But unlike my parents, who treated money like a trophy or a toy, I approached it as a tool, just as Grandpa had taught me. Most people who come into sudden wealth try to change everything at once, Marion warned during one of our sessions. I recommend a gradual transition. I took her advice to heart. Though I now legally owned Grandpa's penthouse, I kept my modest apartment in Brooklyn, using the grand old home primarily for foundation work and quiet reflection. I began renovating it slowly, not to flaunt, but to reimagine it in my own style. Not the glittering excess my parents loved, but something quieter, warmer, something that felt like me. The Arthur Jenkins Marine Conservation Fund quickly became the center of my world. Maya was the first person I brought on board. Her background in nonprofit management made her an ideal fit, even before her pivot to photography. Together, we crafted our mission to document endangered species and fund preservation efforts, with a focus on vulnerable marine ecosystems. "Your grandfather would be so proud," Ms. Chen said warmly when I shared the Foundation's mission statement. "He always believed your filmmaking was about more than just beautiful images. It had purpose." Meanwhile, my parents had relocated to a high-end apartment in Battery Park, still well above their means, though less ostentatious than the penthouse they were forced to vacate. They made several attempts to re-establish contact, each one more transparent than the last. "Darling Clara," my mother cooed during one unexpected visit to my apartment. "We've had time to reflect. Families have disagreements, but blood is thicker than water." "What do you want, Mother?" I asked bluntly. She didn't even bother with the pretense anymore. "The Vanderbilt Charity Gala is next month. We need to make a suitable donation to maintain our standing, but with our current financial difficulties." "No," I said simply, and shut the door on her stunned expression. My father tried a different approach, sending over a formal business proposal for an investment that promised a guaranteed return of 30%. A quick review by my financial team revealed it for what it was: a desperate ploy to access my foundation's capital for his personal use. Their most public tactic came through interviews with local society columnists, painting themselves as victims of undue influence from Grandpa's lawyer. The stories drew little attention but managed to alienate them further from New York's old money circles, where discretion is valued above all else. But not every family connection was toxic. My cousin Sophia, Uncle Charles's daughter, had always been kind, if distant. She reached out one day, her tone carrying genuine warmth. "I've always admired the way you stood firm with the family," she said, over coffee at a quiet cafe of her choosing. "I just never had the courage to do the same." "It's less about courage and more about stubbornness," I admitted. "Having Grandpa in my corner helped too." "Uncle Arthur saw something in you worth nurturing," she said. "The rest of us were too busy competing for status to notice what really mattered to him." Our conversation revealed that Sophia had been quietly studying marine biology, hiding her passion from parents obsessed with prestige. Finding this shared ground led her to become the Foundation's second hire, taking charge of marine habitat restoration initiatives. Through my grandfather's journals, discovered inside the private safe in his library, I gained a far deeper understanding of the forces that had shaped our family. He wrote with raw honesty, especially about the regrets he carried from raising my father. I tried to bridge the emotional gap with money, he confessed, in one particularly poignant entry, only to realize, far too late, that material compensation widens emotional distance. I won't make the same mistake with Clara. His writings also revealed a growing awareness of my parents' financial misconduct. Page after page recorded his struggle between protecting the family and enabling its self-destruction. "Kenneth took another unauthorized loan today," read one entry from 5 years ago. "He thinks I don't notice. Perhaps I failed him more deeply than I thought. If he believes I'm either too blind to see or too weak to act." These private glimpses into Grandpa's heart helped me see his choices not as dramatic gestures, but as carefully considered acts of love, sorrow, and legacy. And they deepened my own resolve to honor that legacy, not just with words, but with action, integrity, and the kind of purpose that endures. Months after the will reading, I hosted a small gathering at the penthouse, now officially my home, though I'd taken to calling it Jenkins' house. It was a subtle shift, but one that reflected a deeper change in perspective. The occasion began as a planning session for the Foundation's first major conservation initiative, but naturally evolved into a cozy dinner with our core team. Maya and Sophia were there, along with Dr. Ethan Davies, a marine biologist from MIT we'd recently brought on as our scientific advisor. Ethan had approached the Foundation with the detached professionalism of academia, but our shared passion for marine conservation quickly forged something more profound between us. "I expected a bored heiress pretending to care about the environment," he admitted one evening, as we reviewed trap camera footage of elusive short-finned pilot whales. "I've never been so happy to be completely wrong. Unlike others who suddenly found me interesting after news of my inheritance spread." Ethan seemed wholly indifferent to my financial standing. He drove a 10-year-old Prius, lived in a modest faculty apartment, and often forgot to cash his consulting checks. Money is just potential energy, he once told me during a spirited debate over conservation strategy. It only matters when it's converted into kinetic energy, real change in the world. It was exactly the kind of thing Grandpa would have said. And that likeness didn't go unnoticed by me. As our professional relationship gradually grew into friendship and perhaps something more, I found myself approaching it with the same cautious deliberation I applied to foundation decisions. My newfound wealth hadn't made me more trusting. If anything, it made me more wary of people's motives. "You can relax, Maya teased, after watching one of my long conversations with Ethan. "That man is clearly into you, not your bank account. He turned down a Stanford grant just to keep working with our little foundation." "Our foundation isn't so little anymore," I deflected. Though her point was taken. In truth, the Arthur Jenkins Marine Conservation Fund had expanded rapidly in its early months. Our first land acquisition, 800 acres of critical marine-adjacent habitat in Maine, had garnered positive press and opened doors to new donors and strategic partners. We began exploring expansion along the Long Island Sound corridor. All the while, I continued my work as a documentary filmmaker, now with the luxury of choosing projects aligned with the Foundation's mission. Our first major exhibition, Mysteries Beneath the Surface, spotlighted rare species fighting for survival in the last wild corners of our oceans. On opening night, standing beside large-scale prints of beluga whales, bull sharks, and yes, the very same short-finned dolphins from Ethan's footage, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. He would have loved seeing his resources transformed into this kind of impact. Tangible, meaningful protection for a natural world he and I both cherished. "Your grandfather would be proud," Miss Chen murmured beside me as I greeted guests. "Not just of the foundation," she added, "but of how you've handled everything." "I hope so," I replied, watching Ethan animatedly explain the ecological importance of coral reefs to a circle of potential donors. "I'm just trying to make choices he'd approve of." "Arthur didn't want you to live your life seeking his approval," she gently corrected. "He wanted you to live by your values, the ones he helped cultivate, but never tried to control." Her words stayed with me long after the event ended. Was I making decisions because I truly believed in them, or because I was still seeking Grandpa's validation? It was a question I kept returning to, especially as the foundation grew. And so did my personal life. When my parents made one final attempt at reconciliation, this time through their family attorney instead of another uncomfortable visit, I found myself at a crossroads. The letter spoke of a fresh start contingent upon transitional financial support, a thinly veiled request for yet another bailout. For days, I wrestled with how to respond. What would Grandpa want me to do? What did I want to do? Were those answers the same, and did they need to be? The answer came to me one quiet evening as I reread one of my grandfather's journal entries, one he had written just before his diagnosis. "The greatest gift we can give the people we love," he had penned, "is not shielding them from consequences, but trusting in their ability to learn from them." The next morning, I sent a short, measured reply to my parents. I declined any form of financial support but offered something more enduring: honesty. In the letter, I detailed the toll their choices had taken on me throughout my life, and expressed a hope, however distant, that someday they might value our relationship more than the resources they once chased. They never responded, but I felt lighter having written it. I had freed myself, not just from obligation, but from resentment. For the first time, I treated them not as a wounded child seeking approval or pity, but as an adult with boundaries. That shift became a turning point, not just in how I dealt with them, but in how I approached every relationship and decision going forward. The Arthur Jenkins Marine Conservation Fund was no longer simply my grandfather's dream that I was executing. It had become my vision, shaped by my experiences and values. The penthouse had evolved from a mausoleum of memory into a living headquarters, pulsing with purpose and possibility. And most importantly, I had grown beyond being just Arthur Jenkins' granddaughter. I was now unmistakably Clara Jenkins, a woman defined not by her inheritance or family name, but by the choices she made and the impact she created. A year after that life-changing will reading, I stood on a small podium overlooking what had once been my grandfather's favorite fishing spot, now the heart of the Arthur Jenkins Marine Sanctuary. Behind me stood a modest stone building housing our research center and visitor facilities. In front of me stretched 5,000 acres of protected mangroves, wetlands, and seagrass meadows, home to dozens of threatened species and open for public education and exploration. Today, I told the gathered crowd of conservation partners, local officials, and journalists, we are not just opening a wildlife sanctuary, we're continuing a legacy of stewardship that my grandfather believed in deeply. Arthur Jenkins understood that true wealth isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we preserve for those who come after us. The journey to that moment had transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined when I first sat in Miss Chen's office, stunned by the inheritance that upended my life. The foundation had grown, now employing 20 full-time staff, safeguarding over 8,000 acres across the East Coast, and launching education programs in schools throughout the region. But the professional milestones paled in comparison to the personal growth. I was no longer defined by my connection to my grandfather or in rebellion against my parents. I had become my own person, guided by purpose, not family dysfunction. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over drinks and soft music played beneath the canopy, Sophia approached with a champagne flute in hand. To Uncle Arthur, she toasted, then added warmly, and to you, Clara. I don't think any of us realized how much this family needed someone to break the cycle. The cycle of treating money as a substitute for real connection, she continued, of measuring worth in wealth instead of character. You know, Daniel's been volunteering at a youth center, said he was inspired by what you're doing with the foundation. That was news to me. Daniel, once among my harshest critics after the will reading, had apparently begun his own quiet transformation. People can surprise us, I said, more to myself than to her. Speaking of surprises, Sophia nodded discreetly toward the edge of the crowd, where my parents stood awkwardly, uncertain, clearly unsure whether they belonged. I hadn't invited them, but I wasn't shocked to see them. The opening had drawn considerable local media attention. Excuse me, I murmured to Sophia, walking toward them with a mix of emotions stirring inside me. My mother spotted me first, nervously smoothing down a dress that was significantly less extravagant than anything she would have worn a year ago. My father stood beside her, stiff and smaller somehow, as if time had finally caught up with him. Clara, my mother began hesitantly. It's a beautiful ceremony. Your grandfather would have loved it. Thank you, Mom, I replied, maintaining a polite but careful distance. What brings you two here? My father cleared his throat. I wanted to see what you've built. It's impressive. Coming from him, that was the closest thing to a compliment I had ever received. I studied their faces, looking for signs of hidden motives, but found only a hesitant sincerity. How have you been? I asked, genuinely curious. Managing, my father said with surprising candor. I'm teaching business courses at a community college now. The paycheck's not what I'm used to, but he trailed off, visibly humbled. But it's honest work, my mother finished for him. We've had to scale back. It's been a lesson. I nodded, unsure how to respond to this version of my parents, humbled, working, apparently trying to connect without strings attached. Would you like a tour of the sanctuary? I offered, almost impulsively. The walking trails are open to visitors. We'd love that, my mother said quickly, before my father could speak. If you have time. I can make time, I replied, and realized I meant it. I didn't fool myself into thinking a polite conversation would mend everything or bring us the closeness I once craved. But maybe, just maybe, we could build something new, something honest, something rooted in reality instead of guilt or obligation. As I led them toward the trailhead, Ethan walked silently beside me, a steady presence. Over the past year, our relationship had deepened into something I cherished. A true partnership, grounded in shared values and genuine affection, not status or fortune. You okay? He murmured as my parents walked ahead, admiring the sanctuary. I'm okay, I said aloud, surprised to feel how true it was. They can't hurt me anymore, not because I'm rich or powerful, but because I finally know who I am. He squeezed my hand. You've always known, you just had to believe it. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the sanctuary had grown still, save for the chirping of tree frogs around the pond, I returned to my grandfather's favorite spot, now mine. The wooden bench overlooking the water had been one of the first things I insisted on preserving during development. Sitting there in the twilight, I pulled out his final journal. I opened to a familiar entry, one I had read countless times over the past year, drawing strength and comfort from his words as I learned to navigate a life I never expected, but had grown to embrace as my own. True wealth, my grandfather once wrote, isn't measured in dollars, but in freedom. The freedom to make choices grounded in principle rather than necessity. The freedom to give without expecting return. The freedom to become who you were meant to be, not who the world expects you to become. This, he continued, is the legacy I hope to leave for Clara, not just financial security, but the courage to live authentically in a world that constantly pressures us to compromise. I closed the journal softly, just as fireflies began their evening dance over the water. In the end, my grandfather had given me exactly what he intended, not merely money, but clarity. The perspective to see wealth as a responsibility, not a trophy. The wisdom to understand that genuine relationships, built on connection and trust, are the true currency of a rich life. $30 million changed my circumstances, yes, but the real transformation came from within. It came from the choices I made about how to use that wealth, who to trust, what to prioritize. My phone buzzed with a message from Maya, checking in after the event. Year 1. Rasa's total success. So proud of you, boss lady. Brunch tomorrow to celebrate? I smiled and typed back a quick yes. This, I thought, was the wealth that mattered most. Friends who were there before the fortune and stayed just as real after. A purpose that extended far beyond comfort. And the freedom to define success on my own terms. As twilight melted into night, I made my way back to the research center, where lights still glowed and our team pored over the day's wildlife monitoring data. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, new conservation efforts, and more chances to honor my grandfather's legacy while building my own. This journey hadn't been easy, but it had been right, and in the end, that made all the difference. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? What do you think defines true wealth? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics and forging your own path. Thank you for walking this journey with me. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't sitting in a bank account. It's the wisdom to use what you have wisely.